The dragon came at noon, when the sun was highest and the shadows were smallest. That was when Vermithrax always came for tribute. He liked to be seen. Kale stood with the other villagers in the square, watching the red shape grow larger in the sky. Around him, people clutched their children closer. Some wept quietly. Old Marta whispered prayers to gods who had stopped listening long ago, if they ever had. The dragon landed with a sound like thunder. The ground shook. Dust rose in clouds. Vermithrax was massive, bigger than the village hall, bigger than anything that should be able to fly. His scales gleamed like rubies in the sunlight. Smoke curled from his nostrils with each breath. He had lived for 3,000 years. The village had existed for barely 200. Kale stepped forward with the tribute card. His hands did not shake. He had learned long ago not to show fear. Dragons could smell it, they said. Whether that was true or not, Kale did not know. But Vermithrax certainly seemed to enjoy it when people trembled. The cart was loaded with their best. 6 sheep, 4 goats, a cow, preserved meat packed in salt, 3 barrels of grain, a chest of copper coins, though dragons had no use for money. It was simply expected. This was the way things were. This was the way things had always been. Vermithrax lowered his enormous head to inspect the tribute. His eye was larger than Kale's head, golden and ancient and utterly without mercy. The dragon sniffed once, then nodded. "Adequate," Vermithrax said. His voice was like mountains grinding together. "Your village may live another season." Kale bowed. Every muscle in his body wanted to run, to fight, to do something other than bow. But that was suicide. You did not fight dragons. You survived them. You endured. That was all humanity had ever done. Then Joran stepped forward. Jorn was young, barely 20. He had just married in the spring. His wife was pregnant with their first child. He was strong and brave and stupid. He looked Vermithrax in the eye. "Why?" Joran asked. His voice shook, but he did not look away. "Why do you take from us? You do not need our food. You hunt your own. Why do you demand tribute?" The square went silent. Even the children stopped crying. Everyone knew what happened to humans who questioned dragons. Vermithrax tilted his head, almost curious. For a moment, Kale thought perhaps the dragon would answer. Perhaps he would explain. Perhaps there was some reason beyond simple cruelty. Then Vermithrax breathed. The fire was instant. One moment Joran stood there, defiant and young and alive. The next moment he was ash. The heat was so intense that Kale had to shield his face. When he looked again, there was only a black smear on the ground where Joran had been. "Because I can," Vermithrax said simply. He looked around at the gathered villagers with something like amusement. Any other questions? No one spoke. No one moved. The dragon gathered the tribute in his claws and launched himself into the sky. The wind from his wings knocked several people to the ground. Within seconds he was gone, a red dot disappearing toward the mountains. Joran's wife screamed. It was a sound Kale would hear in his nightmares for years. That night, Kale could not sleep. He sat outside his house and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, Vermithrax slept on a pile of gold and treasures stolen from 100 villages. Somewhere out there, other dragons did the same. They ruled the world simply because they were born with fire in their throats and scales like armor. Humans had nothing. No fire, no scales, no magic. They lived 40 or 50 years if they were lucky. Dragons lived thousands. A human lifetime was less than a season to a dragon. What could humanity possibly do against such creatures? But Joran had asked a question. A simple question. Why? And Vermithrax had not answered it. He had only killed the one who asked. That meant something, though Kale was not sure what. He thought about all the things humans could do that dragons could not. Humans could work together. Dozens of people had built the village hall in a single summer. Could a dragon do that? Humans could plan. They planted crops knowing they would not harvest them for months. Could a dragon do that? Humans could teach. Kale's father had taught him to work metal. His father's father had taught his father. Knowledge passed from person to person, building on itself. Dragons were born with power. Humans had to create theirs. It was a small thought, a fragile thought, but it was something. Over the next weeks, Kale began to talk to others, quietly, carefully, never where they might be overheard. He talked to the blacksmith about making better tools. He talked to the hunters about working in teams. He talked to the elder about organizing the villages, about sharing knowledge between settlements, though most people thought he was mad. Fight dragons? Impossible. Dragons had fire. Dragons had claws and teeth and wings. Dragons had lived since before the oldest human kingdoms. What could mere humans do? But some listened. The blacksmith, whose son had been killed by a dragon 5 years before. The hunter, who had once watched a dragon destroy an entire herd of deer just for sport. The elder, who remembered when there had been more villages, before the dragons had burned them. 3 months after Jorn died, Kale gathered these few in the forest outside the village. 6 people. Just 6. It was nothing. It was barely the beginning of a beginning. But Kale looked at them and spoke the words that would change everything. They have fire, he said. We have time. We have each other. We have the ability to learn, to build, to plan. They are stronger than any one of us. But we do not have to fight as one. We can fight as many. It will take years, the blacksmith said. Maybe generations. Yes, Kale agreed. But dragons think in centuries. They will not see us coming until it is too late. We will probably die, the hunter said. Yes, Kale said again. But our children might live free. Is that not worth dying for? They looked at each other. 6 people in a forest planning impossible things. Then, one by one, they nodded. It was not much. But it was a beginning. 20 years changed everything and nothing. The dragons still ruled. Villages still paid tribute. People still died when dragons were displeased. But something was different now. Hidden beneath the surface, like roots growing deep underground. Kale was gray now, his hands rough and scarred. His daughter Mira had grown into a woman with her father's eyes and her mother's sharp mind. She stood in the hidden workshop, watching the blacksmith's apprentice adjust the tension on the mechanism. Again, she said. The apprentice released the lever. The metal arm snapped forward with a sharp crack. The bolt flew across the cave and struck the target dead center. Not perfect, but better than yesterday. Myra made notes on the slate. Every detail mattered. The angle, the tension, the weight of the bolt. Dragons were not defeated by luck. They were defeated by precision, repeated 1,000 times until it became instinct. We need it faster, she said. If we miss the first shot, there will not be a second. It will break if we increase the tension more, the apprentice said. Then we make it stronger. This was how it went. Problem after problem. Solution after solution. Human lives were short, but human knowledge did not die. Kale had taught Myra. Myra would teach her children. The dragons had forgotten this, if they ever knew it. A dragon's knowledge died when the dragon died. Human knowledge grew with every generation. The workshop was one of 7 hidden locations. Each village that joined the network maintained at least one. They could not risk putting everything in one place. If the dragons discovered any of them, the others would continue. Myra left the workshop as the sun set. She had 3 more meetings tonight. Communication between villages was dangerous. Dragons might notice too much travel. So they used signals, smoke patterns that looked like cooking fires, marked stones along hunting trails, messages hidden in tribute cards. It was slow. It was careful, but it was working. That night, she met with representatives from 4 other villages. They gathered in a barn, speaking in whispers by candlelight. "The eastern villages are ready," said Torin, a scarred hunter who had lost his eye to dragon fire. "They have 20 ballistae. Crude, but functional. The northern settlements have focused on communication," added Elsa, an elder with white hair. "They have a signal system that can pass messages 50 miles in a day." Myra nodded. Different villages contributed different strengths. No one settlement could match a dragon. But together they might have a chance. "We need to test them," Myra said. "All the weapons, all the strategies. We need to know if any of this will actually work." "You mean kill a dragon?" Torin said flatly. Yes, the word hung in the air. For 20 years they had prepared. They had planned. They had built. But they had not actually fought. Not really. Now it was time to see if any of it mattered. "Which dragon?" Elsa asked. "Not Vermithrax," Myra said quickly. "He is too old, too powerful. We need a younger one. One who is confident. One who will not expect resistance." Over the next month, they watched the skies. Dragons had territories. They followed patterns. Humans had learned to read those patterns. A young green dragon named the Sarx hunted in the southern valleys. He was only 300 years old, barely more than a child by dragon standards. He was arrogant. He flew low. He liked to toy with his prey. He was perfect. They chose the narrow canyon carefully. High walls. One entrance. One exit. They positioned the ballistae on the ridges, hidden under camouflage netting. They stationed observers at both ends with signal mirrors. They placed smoke pots in strategic locations. Then they waited. The Sarx came 3 days later, hunting deer. He swept into the canyon, his green scales glinting. He was focused on the herd below, not watching the cliffs above. The signal mirrors flashed. The smoke pots ignited, filling the canyon with thick gray clouds. The Sarx roared in surprise, beating his wings to rise above the smoke. But that made him a perfect target. The ballistae fired. Most bolts missed. 2 struck his wings that bounced off scales. But one lucky shot caught him in the thin membrane of his left wing. The Sarx screamed and dropped, crashing into the canyon floor. He was wounded, not dead. And now he was angry. The Sarx breathed fire, sweeping the cliffs. The flames were overwhelming, impossible to fight. 3 men died instantly. But the others had planned for this. They had dug pits and built stone walls. They retreated, then advanced again when the fire stopped. More bolts flew. These were heavy, designed to penetrate. One struck the Sarx in the shoulder, another in his side. The dragon tried to take flight, but his damaged wing would not carry him. He charged instead, a mountain of rage and teeth and claws. 2 more men died, crushed under his weight. But humans kept coming. They did not run. They swarmed him like insects, stabbing with spears, firing more bolts, forcing him toward the canyon's dead end. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of chaos and fire and death. When it was over, the Sarx lay still, his green blood soaking into the earth. 17 humans were dead. Another dozen wounded, many burned. But the dragon was dead. Myra stood over the body, breathing hard. Her hands shook. All around her, people were crying, both from grief and from the impossible realization of what they had done. "We killed a dragon," someone whispered. "We killed a dragon," another repeated. Louder. Soon they were all saying it, shouting it, the impossible truth of it. Humanity had always run from dragons. They had hidden. They had paid tribute. They had endured. Now they had fought back and won. But Myra did not celebrate. She looked at the 17 bodies being prepared for burial. She looked at the burned survivors. This was not a clean victory. This was not glory. This was the harsh mathematics of war. One dragon had cost them 17 humans. How many dragons were there in the world? Hundreds? Thousands? How many humans would die before this was over? But they had proved it could be done. That was worth the cost. It had to be done. Word spread faster than Myra expected. Within weeks, other villages were asking how it was done. Within months, the network doubled in size. People who had lived in fear their entire lives suddenly saw a future where their children might live differently. The dragons would notice eventually. They would come in force. But now humanity was ready. Cale came to the canyon one evening to see where his dream had become real. He was old now, too old to fight. But he stood beside his daughter and looked at the massive corpse. "It is just beginning," he said quietly. "I know," Myra replied. "They will come for us now." "Good," Cale said. "We are ready." He was right. Everything they had built, all the weapons and plans and coordination, had been preparation. Now the real war would begin. But for the first time in human history, they would not face it on their knees. The dragons gathered in the ancient mountain stronghold where no human had ever walked. 30 of them, ranging from young fire-breathers barely a century old to ancients who remembered when the world was ice. They perched on ledges carved from living stone, their scales reflecting torchlight in a rainbow of colors. Red, gold, green, blue, black. Each one powerful enough to destroy a human army alone. Vermithrax stood at the center, his red scales dulled with age, but his presence still commanding. When he spoke, even the other dragons listened. "The Zorix is dead," he said. The words echoed through the cavern. "Killed by humans." Some of the younger dragons laughed. It was impossible. Absurd. Humans were prey. They had always been prey. But others, the older ones, did not laugh. They had lived long enough to see patterns, to recognize when something fundamental was changing. A copper dragon named Ethermaw stepped forward. She was neither the oldest nor the strongest, but she was known for her patience and observation. For decades, she had watched human settlements, curious about these short-lived creatures. "They are changing," Ethermaw said. "I have seen it. They build differently now. They communicate across distances. They coordinate their actions in ways they never did before. They are still humans," snarled a young black dragon named Mordax. "Weak, fragile. They live barely long enough to learn to walk before they die. What threat could they possibly pose?" "A threat that learns," Ethermaw replied. "We live centuries, but we do not change. They live decades, but each generation builds on the last. They are climbing, and we have not noticed." Vermithrax considered this. He was old enough to remember when humans lived in caves, when they had not even discovered bronze. He had watched them grow, but had thought little of it. What were human advances compared to dragon fire? But the Zorix was dead. That could not be ignored. "Then we will remind them of their place," Vermithrax decided. "We will burn their villages, destroy their weapons, show them that resistance is futile. We have been too tolerant, too patient. That ends now." The dragons roared their agreement. Within a week, they would strike, but Ethermaw flew away troubled. She had seen something the others had not. It was not that humans could kill a dragon. It was how they had done it, together, coordinated, sacrificing themselves for a greater purpose. Dragons did not think that way. Dragons were solitary. Each was a kingdom unto himself. Perhaps that was the real danger. The attacks came like a storm. Dragons struck at dawn at noon, at midnight. They burned fields and homes. They shattered the weapons caches they found. Human casualties mounted into the hundreds, then thousands. But something was wrong. The villages knew they were coming. Somehow, they always knew. When dragons arrived, the settlements were already evacuated. The civilians were gone, hidden in caves and forests through underground passages the dragons had never suspected existed. The dragons burned empty buildings, and when they pursued, there were traps, nets made of chains that tangled wings, pits covered with thin canvas that could not support a dragon's weight, ballistae that fired from hidden positions. None of it would have worked against a cautious dragon. But the dragons were angry, frustrated by empty villages and fleeing prey. They made mistakes. 3 more dragons died in the first month. Then 5. Then 9. In the human camps, Myra coordinated the resistance. She was 50 now, her hair showing gray, her face lined with sleepless nights. Maps covered every surface. Reports came in constantly from signal stations and runners. Dragons spotted over the western valley. Pattern suggests it is hunting the refugee column. Redirect them through the forest pass. Prepare ambush positions 3 and 7. The northern villages are requesting more bolts. Their supplies are running low. Send half our reserve. Keep the other half here. It was exhausting, terrifying. They were losing people every day, but they were also winning. Slowly, painfully, but winning. The key was that dragons fought like dragons, alone, proud, each convinced of their own superiority. Humans fought like humans, together, willing to die if it meant the strategy succeeded. 6 months into the war, Vermithrax led a flight of 12 dragons to destroy the largest human settlement. It was a coordinated attack, the first the dragons had attempted. They would prove that even working together, humans were no match. But the settlement was ready. It had been built specifically for this. The buildings were stone with deep cellars. The civilians were already evacuated. And surrounding the settlement were positions manned by the best human warriors, armed with the latest weapons. The battle lasted 3 hours. Fire filled the sky. The heat was so intense that the stone buildings cracked. Human casualties were staggering. But the dragons were forced to stay low, to maneuver in confined spaces, to expose themselves. When it was over, 4 dragons were dead. Vermithrax was wounded, his right wing torn, barely able to fly. The remaining dragons retreated for the first time. Dragons fled from humans. Vermithrax crashed in a forest clearing, unable to continue. He lay there, breathing heavily, his blood staining the earth. Around him, the trees were scorched from his fire. He heard footsteps. Humans emerged from the forest. 20 of them, armed with spears and crossbows. At their head walked Mira, her hair white now but her eyes still sharp. Vermithrax prepared to die. He had lived 3,000 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had witnessed the birth of mountains and the death of seas. It was, perhaps, time, but the humans did not attack. Myra stepped forward, alone and unarmed. Vermithrax could kill her with a breath, but he was tired. "So tired, I remember you," Vermithrax said. His voice was weak. "You were a child, in the village, when I took tribute." "I remember you too," Mira said. "I remember my father. I remember Jarn, who asked why. I remember every person you killed. Then kill me and be done with it." "No," Myra said. "We do not want to kill all of you. We want you to stop killing us. There is a difference." Vermithrax laughed, a bitter sound. "You think we will simply agree? You think we will surrender our dominion because you killed a few of us?" "I think you do not have a choice," Myra said calmly. "Look at the mathematics, dragon. You are powerful, yes, but we are many. You live long, but we reproduce faster. You fight alone. We fight together. In a war of attrition, you will lose. Not today. Not this year. But eventually, inevitably, you will lose. So you offer what? Coexistence? We offer survival, Myra corrected. You keep your mountains, your territories, but you recognize our sovereignty. You leave us alone. In return, we leave you alone. And if we refuse? Myra's expression did not change. Then we kill you. All of you. It will take time. It will cost us dearly. But we will do it. Because we have learned something you never did. We learned that what we cannot do alone, we can do together. That what we cannot do in one lifetime, we can do across generations. That will is stronger than fire. Vermithrax looked at this small, fragile creature. Her life would be over in a blink. She would die and turn to dust while he still lived. And yet, she was not afraid. None of them were. That was what had changed. Not their weapons. Not their tactics. Their fear was gone. I will speak to the others, Vermithrax said finally. Good, Myra replied. We will wait. The treaty was signed in blood and ink. Dragon blood, dark and thick, mixed with human ink on parchment that would be preserved for generations. It was not a surrender. Both sides claimed it was not a surrender. But everyone knew the world had changed forever. Dragons retreated to their mountain strongholds. They kept their territories, their treasure, their pride. But they no longer ruled. Humans built their cities without asking permission. They farmed without paying tribute. They raised their children without fear that a dragon might incinerate them for looking up at the wrong moment. Some dragons accepted this. Some did not. Ethermaw was one who accepted. She found herself fascinated by what humans had become. She visited their settlements openly, speaking with their scholars, watching their children play without terror in their eyes. It was strange and new and oddly hopeful. She sat now in a human city, an impossible thing that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. Around her, humans went about their business. Some stared, yes. Some remembered fear. But more treated her with cautious respect, as they might treat any powerful neighbor. A young woman approached, Myra's granddaughter, named Kale after the man who had started everything. She was 20, bright-eyed, full of questions. She studied history and diplomacy, trying to understand both species. May I ask you something? Young Kale asked. You may ask, Ethermaw replied. I may answer. Do you regret it? The old world? Ethermaw considered this. I regret the loss of certainty. For 3,000 years, I knew my place in the world. I knew what I was. Now everything is uncertain. But do you regret the treaty? No, Ethermaw said firmly. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we did not see what you were becoming until you forced us to see it. But the treaty itself? No, it was wisdom, even if it came too late. Some dragons did not agree. I know. In the deep mountains, far from human settlements, a faction of dragons gathered. They called themselves the Rememberers. They remembered the old world when dragons were gods and humans were nothing. Vermithrax led them, still bitter from his defeat, still convinced that dragon superiority was the natural order. We were too few, Vermithrax told his followers. We fought them scattered, confused. But together, with proper planning, we can restore what was taken. Mordax, the young black dragon, was his strongest supporter. They've grown soft in peace. They think we have accepted their treaty. We will strike when they are unprepared. One coordinated attack. Burn their cities to ash. Show them that fire always defeats wool. They planned for months. 20 dragons, working together as dragons had never worked before. They learned, ironically, from humans. They coordinated. They strategized. They would strike every major human city simultaneously, but they made one critical mistake. They assumed that humans had stopped preparing for war simply because the war had ended. The attack came at dawn. 20 dragons descending on 5 human cities at once. It should have been devastating. It should have been the end of human civilization. But the cities were ready. Humans had spent the years of peace building. Not just buildings, but systems. Warning networks that could alert an entire city in minutes. Underground shelters that could hold thousands. Weapons mounted on city walls that made the old ballistae look like toys. And most importantly, they had continued training. Every able-bodied adult knew their role in case of attack. When the dragons arrived, the cities did not panic. They executed plans rehearsed 100 times. Civilians evacuated. Warriors took positions. Signals flashed to nearby settlements. And this time, they were not alone. Ethermaw saw the smoke rising from the nearest city. She knew instantly what it meant. Some part of her had expected this, had known that some dragons would never accept a new world. She made her choice in an instant. She took to the sky, flying toward the battle. Behind her came 3 other dragons, those who had made peace with change. The battle was chaos. Fire and steel. Dragon roars and human shouts. But it was not the massacre Vermithrax had imagined. The humans held their ground. Their weapons struck true. And when Ethermaw arrived with the other treaty dragons, the tide turned completely. Vermithrax found himself surrounded. Dragon fire came from above as well as human weapons from below. He was ancient, powerful, but he was not invincible. Stop this! Ethermaw roared. It is over. It will never be over. Vermithrax shouted back. We are dragons. We were born to rule. We were born to live, Ethermaw replied. And we are choosing death instead. Can you not see? They will kill us all if we force them to. Is pride worth extinction? The battle ended quickly after that. 5 dragons died, including Mordax. The others surrendered when they realized they could not win. Vermithrax lay wounded again, but this time there was no mercy in Myra's granddaughter's eyes. You had your chance, young Kale said. You chose to throw it away. Then kill me, Vermithrax said. No, Ethermaw said, landing between them. Imprison him. Show that justice exists for dragons as it does for humans. Show that the treaty means something. It was a strange concept. Dragons had never had prisons, had never had laws beyond the individual power of each dragon. But young Kale nodded. Very well. But he will never be free. That is fair. Ethermaw agreed. In the years that followed, the world continued to change. Humans built universities where dragons could come to teach and learn. Dragons shared knowledge of the ancient world, of magic and history. Some dragons even allowed humans to study their biology, leading to advances in medicine for both species. Children grew up in a world where dragons were not monsters, but neighbors. Dangerous neighbors, yes. Powerful neighbors. But neighbors nonetheless. They learned both human history and dragon history. They learned that strength came in many forms. An old woman sat in a garden, watching the sunset. Mira was 90 now, near the end of her life. Beside her sat Ethermaw, who had barely aged at all in the decades since the treaty. You asked me once if I regretted the old world, Ethermaw said. I have a question for you. Do you think it was worth it? All the death. All the sacrifice. Myra watched children playing in the distance. Human and dragon younglings together, arguing about some game. My father used to tell me that we had will where dragons had fire. I did not understand it then. I thought will meant stubbornness. Refusal to give up. That is part of it, Ethermaw said. But it is more than that, Myra continued. Will is the ability to imagine a world that does not exist yet, and then build it. Dragons could not imagine a world where they were not supreme. We could imagine a world where we were free. That imagination, that will to create something new, that is what won the war. And was it worth the cost? Myra looked at the playing children again. Ask them. Ask the ones who will never know what it is like to bow before a dragon. Ask the ones who will live their whole lives without that fear. Yes, it was worth it. As the sun set, painting the sky in colors of fire, a young human girl ran up to them. She was Myra's great-granddaughter, only 7 years old. She carried a book. Grandmother, Athermaw, will you tell us the story? About the war? Myra smiled. Again? I have told you a dozen times, but I want to hear it again. About great-great-grandfather Kale and how humans beat the dragons. We did not beat them, child, Myra said gently. We made them see us as equals. That is different. Your grandmother is wise, Athermaw said. But yes, I will help tell the story. They sat together as the stars came out, the old woman and the ancient dragon and the young child. And they told the story of how the world changed. How fire met will, and how will shape the future. It was not a story of good defeating evil. It was a story of change defeating stagnation, of many defeating few, of cooperation defeating isolation. It was a human story. And now, it was a dragon story too. The world would keep changing. That was what worlds did. But the lesson remained, carved into history, passed from generation to generation. A single human could not match a dragon's fire. But humans were never single. They were many, building on each other's work, standing on each other's shoulders, reaching ever higher.